Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different and, to be honest, kind of scary. I'm going to be breaking down the cost of owning a small airplane for an entire year. I get this question a lot. How much does it actually cost to own a small airplane? So I sat down and crunched the numbers. I went through the receipts, the logs, and today I'm going to share it all with you. The good, the bad, and the expensive. I wanted to break it down by category, and I'll give you some tips along the way as to how you might be able to save some money. Alright, first up are the fixed costs. These are the expenses that I have to pay for regardless of whether I fly or not. The first fixed cost that you're going to have, no matter where you live, is somewhere to store your plane, whether that's a hangar or a tie-down. In my case, I pay $275 a month to keep my airplane tied down in a shade hangar. One piece of advice that I have when it comes to your hangar or your tie-down is to look well in advance for somewhere to store your plane before you purchase your airplane. I was on a wait list for these shade hangars for a long time before I was able to store my airplane there. Before that, I had my airplane tied down at our FBO here in St. George, which was about $50 a month. Obviously, if you store your airplane in a hangar, it's going to be a lot more expensive. Another fixed cost that you'll experience is insurance. Insurance for airplanes is a little bit different than insurance for your car or your motorcycle. For cars and motorcycles, you're required to have insurance. However, you're not necessarily required to have insurance on your airplane. I say necessarily because a lot of airports require that you insure your airplane if you store it at their airport. This being said, airplanes are expensive, so whether your airport requires insurance or not, I would highly recommend spending the money on insurance. For my airplane, insurance for the first year was $1,800. When I bought my airplane, I had about 45 or 50 hours and only about 2 hours in my airplane. One way that you might be able to save money is on insurance. If you purchase an airplane that you already have experience in, your insurance company will charge you a lower premium because you have experience in that type of aircraft. For me, my first year was $1,800 and this was liability only. It was about $5,600 for full coverage on a $50,000 hull, which was a lot. And so I opted to take the risk and only have liability for that first year. Now I have liability and hull coverage for $1,800 a year because I have about 200 hours in my aircraft. Another fixed cost that you'll experience is your annual inspection, or for an experimental aircraft, a conditional inspection, both of which have to happen every 12 months, but the condition inspections are typically cheaper than the annual inspection. I say typically because it's important to shop around and know your mechanic beforehand. I did not do this, and I ended up being charged about $5,500, which in my opinion was a lot more than I should have paid, especially since I've talked to other people and found other mechanics that are used to working on experimental aircraft, and they charge around the $1,200 to $1,800 range for a condition inspection. I have heard of people getting condition inspections for $500 to $800, so it depends on what mechanics you know and what location you're at. The second type of expense that you'll expect when owning an aircraft are variable costs. Variable costs change the more you fly, whereas the fixed costs are something that you have to pay regardless of whether you fly or not. The most notable variable cost that most people think of is fuel cost. Fuel costs will vary depending on the aircraft that you have and how much fuel it burns. My aircraft at Cruise burns about 6.5 to 7 gallons per hour. Granted, I live in Utah and most of my cruising is at about 10,000 feet. If you're at sea level, you'll probably burn more fuel. That means this last year, I spent about $989 on fuel. One of the biggest ways that you can save money when owning an airplane and building time is splitting that time with somebody else. As a private pilot, you're not allowed to receive compensation for flying. However, if you fly with someone else who is a pilot, you can both split the time and split the cost of operating that aircraft. If you include the condition inspection from last year in the hourly breakdown, my cost to operate my airplane is about $140 per hour. That's if I don't split the time with someone else and I'm paying for all of that out of pocket. Another variable expense that you'll expect are oil changes. I change my oil in my airplane every 50 hours, which means that this last year I changed my oil 3 times. Each oil change cost me about $150. I have to buy oil and an oil filter, and I usually do the oil change by myself. This means that last year I spent $450 on oil changes. The next variable expense that I had this last year was some various maintenance. The unexpected maintenance that I had to do on my airplane was a carburetor overhaul, which I was able to do by myself with the assistance of an A&P that I have made friends with. A new mechanical fuel pump that I installed, which I also had help from by that same A&P, an oil pressure sensor, and a couple other miscellaneous small repairs that I had to complete. This came out to a total of $1,700 that I had to pay last year. Along with those miscellaneous repairs, I also wanted to replace the front seats, the pilot and the co-pilot seats. They weren't very comfortable, and it wasn't something that I had to do, but it was something that I decided to do. These seats came out to about $2,600, and some of the work I did myself. I modified some seat frames that were given to me that came from another Zenith, and so I was able to save some money with those seat frames. I had upholstery for those seat frames made by Sport Aircraft in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm not sponsored by Sport Aircraft whatsoever, but I am really pleased with the way that the seats came out. If you're interested in replacing the seats in your airplane, you can reach out to Daniel at Sport Aircraft. He was super helpful and helped me get these seats fit custom to my airplane. One more expense that you might consider when purchasing an airplane are the various subscriptions that you might need. Whether that's a subscription for Garmin to update your avionics, a subscription to ForeFlight, so that you can have access to aviation charts and weather on your phone and iPad, or any other avionics subscriptions that your airplane might require. For example, I have a Garmin 175 in my airplane. The subscription to keep the database updated is about $500 a year. I also have Dynon in my airplane, but the Dynon updates are free for the HDX. So back to the original question, how much did it cost me to own my airplane and operate it for the last year? Other than the purchase price of my aircraft, which was $50,000, the operating expenses for this last year were $21,396.60. That breaks down to about $140 per hour, but I didn't have to pay that full $140 an hour. As I mentioned earlier, if you split time, it's a great way to save money. And I split 37.5 hours with other pilots that were also trying to get time. This means that factoring that in, my total out-of-pocket cost last year was $18,775. If I wanted to save even more money, I could have reached out to other pilots that I know to split time. I've already mentioned a couple ways that you can save money when owning an airplane, but I wanted to touch on a couple more. One of the most effective ways to save money owning an airplane is to partner with somebody else or a group of people on an airplane. At the end of the year, it would make a huge difference if you had a partner. You could split all of your costs in half, or if there were 3 people that owned the airplane, you would only be paying for 1/3 of the cost of everything. Another huge way that I've already touched on to save money is to do as much maintenance by yourself as you can. Obviously, there are a lot of limitations to what an owner can do. However, with experimental aircraft, you do have a lot more leniency on the tasks that you are able to perform and the maintenance that you're able to do. One way that I've found to save a lot of money doing your own maintenance is to make friends with people who are certified aircraft mechanics. I'm not trying to promote taking business from people that you know that are working as aircraft mechanics. But there are a lot of aircraft owners at the airport that are also aircraft mechanics and don't currently work as aircraft mechanics. These are great people to use as resources to learn how to do certain things and to guide you through certain processes of maintaining your airplane. Another way that I like to save money is by buying certain things in bulk. I know that I'm going to be doing multiple oil changes, so when I go and buy oil online, I order enough oil for 2 oil changes at the same time. This will usually save me a little bit in shipping, and the cost per quart of oil is usually a little bit cheaper when you buy in bulk. So yeah, that's the real cost of owning and operating a small aircraft for a year. Hopefully it gives you a better idea of what to expect if you are also planning on purchasing and operating an aircraft. If you still have questions about owning or operating an aircraft, leave it in the comments. If there's something else that you want to see a video on, let me know. In the meantime, check out this video right here, or right here, and I'll see you next time.